Hey friends, it's Megan, and today I want to invite you to jump into my little name time capsule with me. Once again, we're going to go back in time and look at some names from the 1920s. This is a really interesting era. This is the time period nicknamed the Roaring Twenties or the Jazz Era. It is just right after the First World War. And so what I do for all these videos in my Decade series is I handpick 10 names for boys and 10 names for girls that were pretty popular during the time. I pick new names every time, of course. Explore those. We'll pick our favorites of those names that I explore. And then, of course, we can talk about the top 10 names of the time period and compare it to the previous years. So here we go. How about a little color? So first I thought we'd chat about the boys' names, and the first name I have for you is Richard. Richard was number 5 in the 1920s. It's currently number 140 in popularity. It's a German name that means brave ruler. This is a name with a lot of history and used by tons of monarchs. And it was in the top 10 from the 1920s all the way up until the early 1970s. It's currently the lowest it has ever been in U.S. history in popularity at spot number 140. Then I have Charles. Charles was number 6 then. It's number 57 now, another classic male name. It's a French name. It comes from a German name meaning free man. The nickname Charlie has been getting a lot of attention here in the United States for boys and girls. There are so many different international variations of the name Charles, but like I said, Charles is just a classic here, and 63 was the lowest this name has ever been in the charts. Then we have Raymond. Raymond was number 15 in the 20s. It's now number 264, a German name meaning protector. When I hear this name, I think of the show Everybody Loves Raymond. Ray Romano is in. And it was in the top 100 up until the early 1990s. It is now currently the lowest it's ever been at spot number 264. Next we have Arthur, and Arthur was number 20 in the 20s. That's fun. It is now number 323, a Celtic name meaning bear, which is pretty cute. It also has the cool association to the King Arthur, Arthurian legend. And this name was in the top 50 until the 1950s. It's been floating around in the 300 range the past 12 years. Next is Gerald. Gerald was number 44 in the 20s. It's now number 726, and it comes from a German name. It meaning rules with a spear, and it was pretty popular in Ireland actually for quite a while. I think Gerald has a really distinguished, dashing sound to it. It sounds like the lead in an old Hollywood romance film, really popular from the 1920s up until the 1970s. Then I have Gordon. Gordon was number 75. It is now not in the top 1,000. It's a Scottish name meaning great hill. It's interesting to me that Gordon has a similar sound to Jordan, but Jordan is much more popular right now, and Gordon hasn't been in the top 1,000 since 2008. It was a top 100 name, however, from the late 1910s up until the early 1940s. Next is Roland. Roland was number 108 then. It is now number 668. I could actually see this name making a comeback. It went up 77 spots last year, so it is rising just a bit. When I say this name, I don't know if it's my accent or what, but I tend to kind of say it with a soft D, Roland, instead of Roland. But it's a German name meaning famous, and it also means land or land of fame. Then I've got Curtis. Curtis was number 111 then. It's now number 476, which is a little bit more popular than I anticipated it being. It's an old French name meaning courteous or being polite. Also a surname name. It does have a very mature sound to me. I have a hard time picturing this one on a child. And from the late 90s until now, this name has just really been steadily decreasing in popularity. Then we have Sidney. Sidney was number 125 for men with this spelling. It is now number 961. It's a surname name and it's French. It means Saint Denis. With this spelling, it's number 911 for girls in the United States. However, Sidney, Sydney, like Sydney, Australia, is number 98 for girls in the United States. But as a male name with this spelling, it reminds me of the wonderful actor Sidney Poitier. And then the last one for boys I wanted to delve into is Junior. Junior was number 134 then. It is now number 763, and it's Junior on its own, not as a nickname. Junior is usually used as a nickname. So like if your father's name was Michael and your name was Michael, you'd be Michael Jr. And it's interesting that it was so popular as a given name and not as a nickname. It is a name that originated as a nickname, meaning young or younger one. So let's look at these names and pick our favorites real quick. So the boys' names I just mentioned were Richard, Charles, Raymond, Arthur, Gerald, Gordon, Roland, Curtis, Sidney, and Junior. There's no name on this list I actually really love. If I had to pick one, it would be Arthur, just because I have a wonderful great uncle Arthur. There's a couple of names like from this list that are in my family, 3 or 4 of them. But I think Gordon's kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing that one come back either. Okay, let's explore the girls' names now. The first girl's name I wanted to share with you is Betty, and Betty was number 4 during this time, which I think is really interesting because it's not in the top 1,000 now, and it comes from the name Elizabeth, meaning pledged to God. Elizabeth has been wildly popular. It's never been lower than number 26 since names have been recorded in this country, and I think it's really interesting that during this time period, Betty was more popular than the name it came from, Elizabeth. And so Betty, all on its own, was number 4, like I said. It was actually in the top 10 from the 1920s through the 1940s, and it dropped out of the top 1,000 in 1996. Then I have Evelyn or Evelyn, depending on where you're from or how you like to say this name. I tend to say it Evelyn. That's how it's most commonly pronounced here in North America, although I think Evelyn is a gorgeous pronunciation. It was number 12 in the 1920s, and it is now number 20. It is definitely making a comeback. In the 17th century, Evelyn or Evelyn was actually a male name. It's definitely been taken over by the ladies. It's an English name stemming from a French name, and it has a beautiful meaning. It means wished for child. I absolutely love that. And like I said, it is coming back into fashion from the mid-1890s up into the early 1950s. Evelyn or Evelyn was a top 100 name. It has just re-entered the top 100 about 10 years ago, and it has steadily been climbing the charts. It is all the way back up at number 20. Then I have Jean. Jean is number 16 then, and now not in the top 1,000. I know a lot of people have this name on their family tree, and it comes from names like John, meaning God is gracious. It was most popular in the 1920s and 30s. The most popular Jean got was number 12, and it hasn't been in the top 1,000 since 1994. Then I have Lois. Lois was number 22 then, not in the top 1,000 now, and it's derived from a Greek name meaning desirable. And you might be thinking of the character Lois Lane from Superman. That I think is one of the most notable name associations to this name. Lois has not been in the top 1,000 since 1983. Next up is Lillian. Lillian was number 25 in the 20s, and it's now number 26, very close, one spot off. It is one of my personal favorite girls' names. I kind of wish it wasn't so popular. I think if I had like 3 or 4 daughters, I'd easily have a Lillian. It's an English name meaning lily for the flower. It was in the top 50 from the 1880s up until the early 1930s, and it fell in popularity, sinking all the way down to 486 for a time period, and then in 2005 it re-entered the top 50, and like I said, it's all the way up at number 26 now. Then we have Pauline. Pauline was number 37 then, and is now not in the top 1,000. It's a French feminization of the name Paul, meaning small. It's interesting that Paul hasn't really dropped off the charts, but Pauline totally has. It was in the top 100 from 1888 up until 1938, and it's just kind of steadily decreased, falling out of the top 1,000 in 1997. Then I have Lorraine. Lorraine was number 50 in the 20s, now not in the top 1,000 either. It's a French name meaning from the Provence in Lorraine. I could see this name coming back just because the L sound, or names that begin with L for girls, appeal to many people. It was in the top 100 briefly from 1927 to 1937, and it left the top 1,000 off the charts in 1995. Next up is Juanita. Juanita was number 54 in the 1920s, now not in the top 1,000. And I was scrolling through the charts and I was really shocked to see how high this name was. It is a Spanish name, a diminutive of the name Juana, which is a feminization of the name Juan, meaning God is gracious. And it was in the top 100 from 1913 to 1944. Really interesting to me. I had no clue. And it has not been in the top 100 since 2001. Next we have Lucille. Lucille was number 38 then. It is now number 359, which is a lot higher than I thought it was. I immediately think of Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy, and it's a French form of the name Lucilla, meaning light, and it was in the top 100 from 1896 up until 1937. It fell out of the top 1,000 in the mid-1970s and just re-entered in 2002, and even though it's number 359, it has jumped 578 spots in the last 10 years. So maybe we'll have a lot of Lucille's running around. I suspect many of those are going by the nickname Lucy. And then the last one I really wanted to delve into is Maxine. Maxine was number 84, another name that is no longer in the top 1,000. It is a Latin name meaning greatest, and you might notice there are a lot of Max names for boys that are on the rise, and so it wouldn't surprise me if Maxine came back into fashion maybe within the next 10 years or so. From 1915 to 1930, it was a top 100 name, and since the mid-70s, the name Maxine has kind of ping-ponged on and off the top 1,000 chart, never really getting too high. It briefly enters and then just drops off and has not been in the top 1,000 since 1996. So now let's look at these girls' names and pick our favorites. Might not be surprising what my favorite is. Okay, so the girls' names I just chatted about were Betty, Evelyn or Evelyn, Jean, Lois, Lillian, Pauline, Lorraine, Juanita, Lucille, and Maxine. So my favorite is clearly Lillian. Lillian I think is my second or third favorite girl's name at the moment. But my second favorite would be Evelyn or Evelyn. I think that is a gorgeous name as well. Okay, now let's look at what the most popular names of this decade were. For boys, the most popular names of the 1920s, number 1 was Robert, 2 John, 3 James, 4 William, 5 Charles, 6 George, 7 Joseph, 8 Richard, 9 Edward, and 10 Donald. Pretty classic names. 3 out of 10 are names that are reoccurring in my family, actually. So the changes that happened this decade is that Thomas and Frank, which had been in the top 10, are no longer in the top 10, but they just moved down to spot number 11 and 12. And so with them moving out, the names Richard and Donald entered the top 10. For girls, the top 10 look like this: 1 Mary, 2 Dorothy, 3 Helen, 4 Betty, 5 Margaret, 6 Ruth, 7 Virginia, 8 Doris, 9 Mildred, and 10 Frances. So the names that went out were Anna, which moved down to number 13, and Elizabeth, which finally left the top 10 and moved down all the way to number 11. And with them moving out, the names Betty and Doris moved into the top 10. So the only name that was in the top 10 in the 1920s then that is in the top 10 now is William. So that's kind of interesting. For most of these, it's been William and Elizabeth, but now it is just William. So there you have it. I would love to hear what you think of any of these names. I do write all the names down below in the description box if you need to reread them, and I will see you next time when we'll be visiting the 1930s. Thank you for watching.